Hey everyone, it's Beverly Hallberg. Welcome to a special pop-up episode of She Thinks, your favorite podcast from the Independent Women's Forum, where we talk with women and sometimes men about the policy issues that impact you and the people you care about most. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Braceras from Independent Women's Law Center. Earlier this month, a New Jersey state jury ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $750 million in punitive damages to 4 people who said the company's talcum powder caused cancer. That amount was later reduced by the judge to $186.5 million. Here to break down the allegations against Johnson & Johnson and to discuss the recent rise in lawsuits against common household products is Julie Gunlock, Director of IWF's Center for Progress and Innovation. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
So what's going on with baby powder? Should we all be afraid to use it?
No. In fact, I use it, and I think consumers should feel confident to continue using it. What we see here is a very common thing, and it's not just with Johnson & Johnson. It's not just with talcum powder. We see a lot of these lawsuits popping up now for, like you said, common household items, but also things like pesticides and certain agricultural products and chemicals in general. And what it involves is the use of this particular product caused this particular kind of disease or cancer or health issue. And these are very significant lawsuits. And as you mentioned, they often come out with pretty serious payouts, which are then usually reduced in appeal. But still, there's 2 things that happen here. First of all, these companies are now, and when you see these huge payouts, it tends to be a domino effect. Then people will say, well, hey, I use that product or I use that product and I'm now sick, and maybe that's the connection. And so you'll see other people piling on and filing lawsuits. So that's a real problem for these companies. But there's a different thing that happens, and that is it really affects consumer confidence in these products. And so you have people going, oh, gosh, and this is sort of out of the legal sphere, and actually can even be more damaging, I would say, because it makes people go, oh, I don't know, maybe this product isn't safe. That's something that businesses, I think, are probably more worried about, just the idea that their products are suddenly seen as unsafe, are cancer causing, and that can really have a huge impact on the success of their business.
I think one thing that contributes to a lack of consumer confidence is not just the verdicts themselves, but the relentless advertising that the plaintiffs' bar does to recruit plaintiffs to their cause. Yeah. So, my 84-year-old mother-in-law constantly sees these ads. If you or someone has used Roundup and has cancer, please call this number. And she sees it every single day, and so now she's paranoid to go out and garden.
Well, the interesting thing is that what you don't hear about, it's not, it's the relentless advertising, but it's also the relentless media attention on the negative. Okay, so I've always said this, and look, this is not just me talking about it. If it bleeds, it leads is the term that we always hear about the media, right? They're going to report bad news or scary news much more than good news because it gets the clicks. Okay, you're going to click on something bad rather than maybe oh, hey, here's some good news. This product is totally safe. That's not something that's going to get attention. And so you've got this relentless media attention. The truth is that, and so again, so you have major headlines that come out. You mentioned that case, that settlement that just happened, or that ruling that just happened, and that massive payout, that got hundreds of headlines, right? Well, what you don't hear about is the fact that Johnson & Johnson won the last 4 recent court cases, and that since 2018, the verdicts have been pretty evenly split, okay? So they had 8 plaintiff wins and 10 defense wins. Okay, but you never hear about the defense wins. Okay, you only hear about the massively huge payouts. What you also don't hear is that judges are often reducing these absurdly high settlements. So
Right.
there is, it's both that it's not only the advertisements, but it's also the media attention that is overwhelmingly negative.
Right, and as you point out, the media doesn't cover scientific studies because that's dry and that's boring. They cover sensational jury verdicts. So,
Right.
a comprehensive study of 250,000, women that was recently released by the U.S. government and published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found no strong link between baby powder and ovarian cancer. I'm just reading that off a Google search I did, but that was one tiny thing
right.
in a scientific journal. CBS News isn't reporting that. CNN isn't reporting that. So yes,
I admire your Googling search skills.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Because honestly, no, I say that because it's actually hard to find something that's reassuring. It's difficult to find something reassuring, but you're right, it's out there. It's just usually buried in these medical journals that no one's reading.
Right. No one's going to go online and do the Google research and dig into the JMA journal before they purchase baby powder. But if they did, what they would find is that it's perfectly safe. But that's not what they're hearing.
No, look, and this is the thing. Look, I blogged on this, and I actually noted a study examining the ways in which asbestos is detected in talc. Look, talc is a mineral, right? It comes out of the earth, and there can be lots of other minerals in the talc. It's not always pure, and so they have to run tests. The test that was done that detected a teeny amount of asbestos, but that same sample was later tested and found not to have asbestos in it. But of course, you only hear that, oh my gosh, one test was, and they found asbestos. You don't hear that the follow-up test didn't find anything. I think it's also important to talk about juries. A lot of these cases, they're being heard by jurors who are not, they're not necessarily scientists. I mean, maybe they have a geologist on the jury. Maybe there's one mineralogist. Maybe there's one toxicologist.
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. And let's talk about, I read these studies. I mean, it's my job to read these studies. And sometimes I am like, just mouth agape. I don't understand what I'm reading because I am not a geologist. I am not a mineralogist or a toxicologist. And so these things are difficult to understand. And so you imagine that a jury is sitting there. They see this man or this person or this woman or whatever with, a terrible disease who's suing a big company, right? And the idea is, I think this is really important. It's not just that, this talc has asbestos in it and causes cancer. It's this idea that Johnson & Johnson, and this is the narrative, that Johnson & Johnson has been hiding this from the public for years and years, which is, of course, untrue, but also an insane business model. They wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't do that. And so, but the idea is a juror sees this, sympathetic figure, someone who's essentially dying of cancer, and the defendant is a gigantic personal care products company.
It's David versus Goliath,
and the subject itself is incredibly complex, and so and scientifically complex, and so I'm not surprised that juries are awarding these. You're right, these David and Goliath they see it as a David and Goliath, and they're giving David these huge payouts. Because it's hard not to feel bad for David. But that's a real problem in our legal system, and it's a problem for these cases that, again, are very scientifically dense.
Right. It is a problem in our legal system because what you're asking ordinary people to do is to observe a battle of the experts, if you will, and then to determine which expert and which study they think is most scientifically valid. And that is extremely difficult for most people to do, and you're going to get some juries that come out one way and some that come out another way, even if the consensus of the scientific community is really all in one direction.
Yeah, and this is the other thing. Look, science is not like, I would say the scientific process is almost sort of anathema to the legal process, where the legal process you look for like evidence that points to a certain way. Well, the scientific sort of, scientific inquiry isn't like that. We're constantly learning things and evolving and finding new evidence and finding evidence that changes the consensus. A lot of times scientific studies will vary. Even peer-reviewed studies will vary. And there's consensus, but there's wiggle room in there. And so it's really hard in these things because you can find scientific studies that say one thing and then find an equally reputable scientific study that says the other thing. And then we all know that there's a whole nother Pandora's box of junk science or paid-for science or activist-provided science that looks official but really isn't and is yet still very convincing to a jury.
Right, and the role of the judge really there is to weed out that type of science and not allow it before the jury. But oftentimes that doesn't go as it should, and those things do end up before a jury, which is unfortunate.
Well, these lawsuits, we're talking about 15,000 now, lawsuits now that. And again, I mentioned earlier, we're seeing this also. There were huge payouts against the chemical glyphosate, which is a very, very safe, non-carcinogenic pesticide that millions of farmers use safely around the world. And there was a judgment recently, against glyphosate, saying that it caused this particular man's cancer. And now that company, it was Monsanto, it's now Bayer, fighting those lawsuits as well. And we have the same kind of situation here where it's very scientifically dense, it's very complicated. And again, you have even agencies, health agencies, for instance, international health agencies that are run by very political leadership and, basically release reports that are inaccurate and go against really much more respected science in the area. And so we're seeing this across the board. And we're seeing, again, the biggest cost of this is, of course, how does this make consumers feel? Who can they trust? They can't trust the big business. They can't trust the health organization. It really leaves consumers wondering what products are safe, what products aren't safe. They start to doubt their own instincts on this stuff, and it's a huge mess.
So one thing I think is really interesting about both the baby powder cases against Johnson & Johnson and also the Roundup, the glyphosate cases against Bayer, is that the companies in both cases have a business incentive to settle these cases, right? There are thousands and thousands of cases, with even one or two runaway juries could be very dangerous. So they have an incentive to settle the cases, but at the same time, they don't want to pull the products off the shelves because they believe that the products are safe, and they can't put any sort of warning label on the product. In fact, the government prohibits them from putting warning labels on the product because the government says that would be a lie because these things are safe. So if you're warning people against something that isn't true, that's false advertising. So they can't do that. They don't want to pull the products off the shelves. But how do they settle the cases without, but also limit future cases from coming forward? So they're actually kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place on this.
Oh, completely. It's interesting. Johnson & Johnson, actually, when I was researching this piece, actually, I found their statements on after they settled one lawsuit. They sure there are one-off situations where settlement is a reasonable alternative. The decision to resolve any particular case in no way changes our overall position that our talc is safe and asbestos-free and does not cause cancer. And so I found that quote and I put it in my piece because I think it's important to see that this company is saying, look, it does not cause cancer. It's asbestos-free. We are declaring that. But again, this doesn't get any media coverage. And I understand that businesses have to make these calculations. But when you do that, when you settle, because nobody will cover your statement, and the media won't cover the fact that Johnson & Johnson is saying it's asbestos free and it does not cause cancer, then just by settling this and you're sending a message to consumers. That is essentially, like you said, it is essentially the warning label. And look, again, I have great sympathy for these companies, but when they settle, and I know that in many cases they don't have a choice, but it is a message, and it is a de facto warning label on their product.
It incentivizes the plaintiff's bar and incentivizes more lawsuits. So
that's exactly right.
They're not really solving the problem in the long run.
No, they're not. And look, I think a lot of corporations, this is why you see, you see the nervousness among in sort of the corporate world of these activist organizations that do accuse them of things, right? Of environmental degradation, of causing health problems. I mean, I've been following this issue for so long. At one point, some activist group was blaming the toys and Happy Meals on the entire childhood obesity issue. I mean, these activists are really creative. Now, that was we laugh at that now because that's sort of past. Nobody's really talking about that. But at the time, that was a major headache for McDonald's. Okay, and you had them sort of doing flip-flops, and that caused them to change to Happy Meals. I mean, do you remember the old Happy Meals? It was a 6 chicken nugget or 4 to 6 chicken nuggets and a regular size small fry. Now what you get is you get the chicken nuggets, and then you get this. It's like a thumb size fry. Literally, the bag is the size of my thumb.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And it's got 6 fries in it, and then you get baby carrots, and then or apple slices, and you get like a yogurt or whatever. I mean, fine, but I don't know any kid that was happy with that, nor any parent that was happy with those changes. And so companies really do react to this stuff. They really get nervous when activists start agitating. They look for changes. How can we make these people happy? And ultimately, it's so that they will go away. It's not to actually make the consumers happy. It's to make the activists happy. And so I think this is
the activists are never going to be happy, as we know.
They're never going to be happy. They're never going to be happy. And the only way that they will be happy, really, for instance, Johnson & Johnson, is if this talc is pulled off the shelf, right? That's what they want. And then they'll just find a different Johnson & Johnson product. That's what Johnson & Johnson needs to understand. This isn't a battle about talc. It's a battle over their entire line of products. And
arguably, it's a battle over capitalism, and it's an attempt by activists to use the court system to redistribute wealth. I mean, that's when you really look at it in the big picture. That's what it is.
Yeah, and look, this is what they try to do, and I consider this talc case a case of when activists try, because they've tried the regulatory approach. It often is too slow for them. They're now in the courts. But ultimately what they try to do, and they know that this is really effective, is they try to create false consumer demands. And so what they're doing now is they're through these lawsuits, and because they know they have partners in the media, they are trying to get people to be so scared that they don't then purchase talc. And so eventually, look, if this continues and people continue, in my blog post on this, I talked about that. How a friend of mine was like, "Ooh, do you use this? I hear it causes cancer." They're trying to just put that teeny seed of doubt so that ultimately it gets pulled off the shelf because nobody's buying it. So The goal is ultimately to get them off the shelf. They'll use however whatever methods but the lawsuits is a really nice way of doing it. It kills two birds. It gets people scared and it gets huge payouts.
Right. So talk to us a little bit about how these mass tort lawsuits threaten innovation generally, because your center is really focused on innovation and progress. And so what do these lawsuits do to that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, interesting, I'll go back to the glyphosate question. Glyphosate's a great product, very popular with farmers. They have to use a very, very small amount of it to be effective. You often see pictures of big scary men, all, dressed in these sort of hazardous suits, and they're spraying crops. Or you'll see a plane, dumping, spraying over a field the size of a football field, and they're spraying this stuff out of the back of a plane. Well, it's actually for an entire football field size field. You only need about a Coke can of glyphosate, and the rest is water. It's mostly water, but it has a little bit of this glyphosate in it, and it's a very effective pesticide. If we get rid of glyphosate, and there's a tremendous effort to ban this product across the nation, and it's already banned in some European countries, we will have to use much harsher pesticides. Farmers will have to use much harsher pesticides that are cancer causing, that do cause tremendous damage to the earth and soil. And so when I talk about these issues, what frustrates me is often, 100 years ago or, 50 years ago, when they were using this other class of pesticide that was much harsher, eventually they developed glyphosate, which was an improvement. And now, because of ignorance about agriculture and agrochemicals and toxicology, and the activists who constantly agitate about this stuff and get regulatory bodies to back them, you have this situation where we might take a product that's better, that was progress, that marked progress in agriculture. We will then get rid of it, and we will go back to a stage where we're using harsher chemicals. And then, of course, the activists will agitate about that one, and then some bright guy will invent glyphosate again, and we'll be back to where we were. And so this is what frustrates me. Is you see this cycle all the time. And often what these people do is they will say, look, we're all, kids are dying, rates of cancer, they'll make up all these statistics. Look, if you look at the human trajectory, we are doing great. We live in better times than ever before. And so I think sometimes when you get into these alarmist stories or hear about these alarmist stories, it's really helpful to sort of pull back and say,
right.
You know what, the world is a better, safer, cleaner, healthier place. Humans are healthier and living longer than ever before. And it's important to keep that sort of perspective because there's just an awful lot of alarmist sort of gobbledygook out there that makes you think the world is getting worse.
I think that's a great note on which to end, Julie, because really there's so much to be optimistic about. I mean, as you said, we live in a time of, the greatest innovation, economic expansion, health improvements in human history, and it's important to keep that in mind. It really is. Thank you for joining us again today, Julie. We hope our listeners learned something from this conversation. Anyone who is interested in learning more about this topic can check out Julie's work at IWF.org. And while you're there, don't forget to check out the work of the Independent Women's Law Center. From all of us here at Independent Women's Forum, you're in control. I think, you think, she thinks.